10 years of mixing advice in 10 minutes. Well, that's what InTheMix is promising to give us today. I keep seeing this video pop up in my recommendation feed, so I decided to go ahead and give my own experiences along with InTheMix's so I can give the viewers more educational value. Let's go ahead and start the video and get right into it.
It's been exactly 10 years since I bought my first MIDI keyboard. I was super inspired by some of my favorite artists, so I went to the local music shop, got the cheapest one I could get, loaded up the free software, and started making beats in my bedroom just purely for fun. I spent those 10 years producing, mixing, mastering, eventually accidentally sort of turning this from a hobby into a full-time job and running my own studio. But more importantly, it got me thinking about loads of the harder lessons or just straight up mistakes that I've made over the years. A few of them are just simple mixing tips. Others are mindset shifts that really help things click into place. I don't want to turn this into a 45-minute long video essay, but if any of these concepts really resonate with you or connect and you want to have a much deeper conversation, just leave a comment and I'm happy to have a chat, or I can turn any of these into a much longer and more detailed video. This is the best way to mix competing tracks, and it's the most common question I hear. While there are lots of plugins designed to help carve space between different tracks, and you can use EQs and dynamic EQs to attenuate and boost the same regions on different tracks to try to carve space, but the reason it's so difficult to get all of these competing elements to fit together in the mix is because the problem cannot be fixed in the mix. This is one thing that really has to be fixed in the arrangement and production, and nobody likes to hear that. It was so annoying to hear this when I was starting out, or even for many years. But listen to any of your favorite records. Notice how all of the elements groove around each other, fit in the pocket, and they're all working.
I love that point. Nothing can beat great sound selection and proper arrangement. Occasionally, producers will kind of get ahead of themselves and then just start sandbagging on sounds after sounds after sounds. And this is something I've been guilty of myself. Not leaving enough room for the artist, as well as just cluttering the sonic space. Me personally, one of my best experiences in production is actually working with a songwriter literally right next to me, or an artist literally right next to me. And this gives me much more, I would say, better perspective on how to actually produce a full song, as opposed to just making a beat with all kinds of elements just crammed in there, leaving space for the artist to create build-ups, leaving space for the artist to add stacks and harmonies and ad-libs in the background. I found myself using much less sounds than I would have if I was producing a song or making a beat solo. So for all the producers out there, whenever you're producing, try to get somebody to come in along with you. Even if it's a friend that just likes to freestyle, even if it's a cousin or a relative who just knows how to sing, it's going to teach you to not put so many sounds into a beat, into a song, to the point that there's no room for anything to move or breathe. You're just essentially stuck and crammed. And let's say you get the song, you try to send it over to a mixing engineer, they may feel like everything is crammed as well, and then also the engineer might try to fix things in the mix, which some things, like you said, can't be fixed in the mix, and they might start having to use like drum replacement or trying to mute sounds and hoping that you don't notice that they muted some sounds and that you might not get upset. All these things can be prevented with experiencing production with a person next to you, an artist, someone who can give you another vantage point on what needs to be done to actually create a great song.
Once this mindset shift sinks in, your tracks are going to sound so much more confident, they're going to have a lot more purpose, they're going to groove well, and they're going to pretty much mix themselves. Lots of the presets you use, like synthesizer presets, they're so full range with bass, mid, and treble, and they sound amazing. You're not going to be able to stack too much on top of it. You've got to make some compromises if you want to let the song breathe and do what it's supposed to do.
That's another great point. You always want to keep in mind that the final instrument of your song is the human voice. This is something that I didn't know initially. I wish I knew, but I'm going to give this gem to you, and it's also being co-signed by InTheMix. The final element is the human voice. So if you're doing a beat and you feel like it's a little empty, that's a good thing. You're giving the artist room to express themselves.
This is a more practical tip. This is how important it is to check the phase of your samples if you're going to be layering them, especially in the low end. I've got a whole video about this, but really quickly, if you literally zoom in on the sample, say you're layering 2 kick drums, you can see the waveforms go above and below this central line. Just make sure that at the same time they're both going up and down, because these will reinforce each other. If the 2 waveforms are opposite, they're actually going to cancel each other out, and no amount of processing, EQ, compression, distortion, anything you lay onto it can help, because the 2 waveforms are canceling each other out before you've even started. And the reason I share this is I've just had a few embarrassing mixes that I've done where I didn't realize until the next day or the next week why I was struggling. Couldn't make the kick and bass work, layering samples, adding on EQ, low end exciters and distortion, all sorts of stuff. All it needed was the polarity to be reversed. So there's always going to be some degree of phase cancellation. I just didn't understand anything about that for the first couple of years. And I was just, loading on samples and trying to make things work, and it was bad. So
I like to call that type of phasing bad phasing. So for example, if you're playing electric piano in your beat and then you add a phaser, that's a phaser that sounds pleasing to the ear. What he's talking about here is this type of phasing it just doesn't sound pleasing to the ear. It just sounds like things are like competing with each other and not quite on time. This is something I did as well. Like you mentioned here, the drums is inverting the polarity. One tool that I like to use, especially when mixing in Pro Tools, is the down mixer. I like to use the down mixer, and then there's a feature in the down mixer in Pro Tools, which is a stock plugin in Pro Tools that allows you to invert the polarity. And I believe also in FL Studio, there is a feature inside of the channel sampler that allows you to invert the polarity. So you can invert the polarity and see if the kick and the bass are working with each other. And from there, you should be good to go. If not, then you can change your sounds and get everything to work together. Then just have better sound selection so you don't have to fix things later in the mix.
I learned this one years too late. I call it the 5-click rule, and I've never shared this online. At one point, I decided that if anything was going to take more than 5 clicks in my DAW or software, I had to find either a better way to do it, automate it, shortcut it, or simply just use a different software. My relationship with the software at the start was really bad. I felt like I was wrestling this software to make it work for me. I always felt like I was having to do the heavy lifting, and the software was just totally getting in the way. There had to be a better way to do it. And the truth is, if you go through the manual, if you look for advice online, there almost certainly is. If you're trying to record stuff, add effects, pull in your favorite presets, load up projects, there's no need to be clicking through loads of menus unless you're looking for very obscure things, or maybe you're doing something very labor intensive, like manual pitch correction. If I'm creating folders, opening up new projects, I can just type a name, type the artist name, song name, and it will generate all the folders, open the project, pull in the tracks, open up all my effects. You usually pay quite a lot of money for these softwares, so at least let them do a lot of the heavy lifting for you so that you can just be creative, do your music production, mixing, mastering, whatever it is, and have a bit of fun with it instead of wrestling with the software.
I've ran into this issue as well, as far as feeling like I'm wrestling with the software. The solution for me was really finally getting into the actual manual. Unfortunately, I don't know if you guys have been guilty of this, is just looking quickly at different videos or different forums, getting a baseline understanding of your software, and then just starting. You don't really have a comprehensive understanding of all the different layers of your tools. And this can kind of make you feel like you're chasing your tail to a certain extent. Make sure you read the manual, understand your DAW and all the capabilities, so that way whenever you run into an issue, you don't feel like you have to rack your brain to find a solution. You already know exactly what your DAW does, how it can do it, and exactly where you need to go to find that tool.
This one is insanely controversial, and I really don't know why, but basically a few years ago it looked like loudness regulations and specifications were going to be coming in, and that it would make everything more beneficial to you if you mastered at slightly lower levels and followed the specifications for particular streaming services. But it's become completely apparent to me, especially after my last mastering video where I looked at what a bunch of professional engineers were doing and what levels they were hitting. But to keep this brief, basically the loudness wars are over and loud has won. Almost all professional engineers are pretty much disregarding the specifications that Spotify or Apple Music are giving, and we're simply doing what's best for the song or maximal loudness. Now, this annoys a lot of engineers because it makes people think, well, you don't need to hire anyone, you can just do this yourself. But I actually think, and so do a lot of my clients, that this makes it even more important to hire a mastering engineer because they can audition a whole bunch of loudnesses, give you loads of options, and we can both pick the version that sounds best for your genre instead of arbitrarily following what Spotify or iTunes or Apple Music thinks is best for your song. In short, the loudness wars are over. You don't need to master to any specific specifications. Those regulations exist so that when you submit your song, it's not going to blow anyone's eardrums out.
The infamous loudness wars. Man, where do I start? How loud can we get? So regardless, like you mentioned, whenever you submit your music to Spotify, I believe they place you at negative 14 LUFS. I'm just going off the top of my head. Honestly, don't cancel me, guys. Whenever I'm doing a song, I tend to aim around negative 9 LUFS. I know that's loud, but whenever an artist is listening to their song, they want to make sure that it feels competitive and it feels loud and just hits them really hard. So I do go to negative 9, but like you said, Spotify is going to lower it to negative 14 LUFS, and that's that. I believe you have an option of turning off the loudness regulation in Spotify. So if you're a music head and you don't want to deal with the added compression of Spotify, you just want to hear the raw version of it, there's a feature in Spotify for you to turn that off. But be careful, because without that compression, could blow your eardrums out, because some of us are mixing super loud. But it's the nature of the game, so here we are.
This is a more practical tip. Soloing your channels is great when you're learning effects or you're learning processing, but when I'm actually mixing, this slows me down because it's so easy to make things sound good in solo. You know what it's like. You mix something that sounds amazing, you play the rest of the tracks, and it doesn't fit in. You have to make a load of adjustments. So what I try to do, and this is really difficult and disorienting at first, is playing that track in the context of everything else. If you're mixing the snare, keep the rest of the drums on while you're adding the effects. If you're mixing the vocal, maybe keep the guitars or the synthesizers on, even at a lower level. This is going to rapidly improve the speed of your mixing because you're not going to have to go back and remix everything for the second, third, or fourth time when things aren't fitting in. But also it reduces your ear fatigue because you will be working quicker, not having to listen to the same sounds over and over again.
Man, that is a great point, man. I've chased my tails so many times for so many years. It's not even funny. You can have a certain sound soloed and it sounds amazing. You add the strings or the pianos or the vocals or guitar, and you're just like, whoa, what? Okay, it just sounded good a second ago. Now it kind of feels like weird. Like where did the kick go? I don't understand. Okay, do I need to do something with the piano? Do I need to wait? And then you mute everything else, solo the kick. You're like, okay, now it sounds good again. That process can be a huge headache. I've had many sleepless nights over this. So, like he mentioned, you want to make sure that you have more than one element whenever you're mixing your song or maybe even your beat, because you want to have things in context. How does that kick sound in context with that piano? How does that snare in context sound next to the guitar? You're not going to really know how things fit together if you're just working solo. One other thing I want to point out is to essentially have a vision of what you want the final version of your beat or your song to sound like. Once again, I can't stop harping on this plugin, which is Metric AB. This allows you to AB your song that you're working on with a reference song, so like a professionally mixed and mastered beat or commercial recording. And then you can listen to your beat, and then you can listen to the beat of someone else who's had their music professionally done. So that way that can give you ideas. This can give you a path of where you want to take your song to. So you're not just flying blind. Okay, my snare is here, my hi-hat's over there, the guitar is over there, the conga's over there. Where am I going? Okay, the conga sounds good now. Okay, the ad-lib sounds good now. You don't really know where you're going. You don't have a vision of what you're trying to create. So I recommend using a reference. Also, another thing in relation to this is kind of figure out if you want to use a limiter ahead of time on your master bus, because you can mix a song, make it sound good, and then you add a limiter later, and then things kind of fall apart. Even though you've added a limiter, which is typically has a gluing element, but it can kind of poke out and show certain things that you initially didn't hear because you're adding the limiter later. Personally, I like to mix through the limiter, so I like to have a limiter on my master bus, then start to mix so everything is glued together already. So when I'm done and I'm ready to export, I'm not adding a limiter later and having all kinds of weird new problems that are popping up out of nowhere.
You've probably heard the phrase, it's not about the gear, it's about the ear. And while this tries to be positive, I think a lot of the time it's actually just wrong, and it can sometimes come across as gaslighting when there's people sitting in front of really expensive equipment telling you that it's not about any of that, it's all about your ears. Some issues are going to be skill-based and you don't need more equipment, it's all just about what you know, but there are other times when you do need the right tool for the job. Now, we don't apply this phrase to any other profession that I can think of. If you're an electrician, it's okay to have all the tools you need in your toolkit. Gardener, it's okay to have a great lawnmower. Video editor, you can have a great color-accurate screen, otherwise you can't see what you're doing. If you're a music producer, mixer, mastering engineer, it's okay to have good equipment that lets you accurately hear your music. When I was starting out, I had awful speakers, no acoustic treatment. No amount of skill could have made that much better. There are things that I could not even hear in my mix that were issues, and having a good monitoring environment certainly would have helped. The message here is not to go out and buy a load of equipment, it's just to understand the limitations of your own equipment, and don't let people gaslight you while sitting in front of loads of expensive equipment telling you that it's all about their ears and that none of the fancy equipment makes a difference. Because I've seen people with millions of dollars of equipment and rooms surrounding them say that it's all about their ears, and it's just like, well, why would you have all that incredible equipment if you didn't need any of it?
Okay, so there's a couple of things going on here. To me, it kind of depends on what exactly the person who's saying it's not about the gear, it's about the ears. What exactly are they talking about? Are they talking about their mixing environment, as far as acoustic treatment, as far as any type of diffusers or panels or super expensive studio monitors? Are they talking about that gear? Are they talking about the analog mixing board and all kinds of rack gear like a Neve 1073, an LA2A, a distressor? They have all that stuff, and to run their recording off of a C800G, are they saying that type of gear? So it depends to me on what gear they're talking about. In reference to the ear portion, I think it's important to invest in good acoustic treatment and also studio monitors that you're comfortable with, that you understand. You know what certain things sound like on them, and you know how to correct any type of flaws or imperfections in the music due to the fact that you know your monitors and you know exactly how they deal with different frequencies. So if you have some mid-range monitors that you're really familiar with and you understand, in that sense, you don't really need to upgrade to really expensive gears, like someone who might use that phrase is referencing. However, if you're speaking about things like the vocal chain recording, let's say the microphone, the preamp, any type of hardware compressors, in that sense, it is important to invest in higher quality gear. If it's in your budget, that's going to be a point that you want to kind of work on and grow and reinvest in yourself. I personally am a proponent of a solid analog mixing chain if you can, once again, afford it and it's in your budget, because that way you're creating richer raw materials, so you don't have to necessarily do too much fixing it in the mix later, so to speak. If that makes sense, you already have things sounding good, you're putting it in your DAW, you're mixing it, and you're getting a great, let's just say, vocal take due to the fact that you have quality in, and then that's going to create quality out. As far as the actual mixing process in itself, in reference to the it's not the gears, it's your ears, hey, there are plenty of really, really capable digital mixing plugins these days. Whether you're talking about UAD, Plugin Alliance, there's a ton of different ones. I don't have to promote them all here. Man, I've seen some really, really capable engineers pull out some amazing songs just using the same plugins that a lot of let's just say newbie engineers or newbie producers or newbie recording artists have on their own computers. You know, they just understand the gear more. They understand how to deal with frequencies and space and sonics in a way that someone else may not know how to do. So in that sense, it's not the gear, it's the ear, due to the fact that, let's just say they're more seasoned and they know exactly what to do to get things sounding great quicker. You know, you're not necessarily paying for them to mix the song in, let's say, 1 or 2 days. You're paying for the 15 years or 20 years of experience that brought them to the point to where they can use these simple tools to pull out an amazing mix without using expensive hardware.
So this one's a bit awkward because I know that I am a person online who's trying to share advice from time to time. But at least with me and other people in videos, we've got a name, a face, there's a level of accountability. If I make mistakes, I'm either going to own up to them and fix them, or people in the comments are going to tell me that and we can all learn from it. But the amount of things that I picked up on forums and blogs as a beginner that I've had to unlearn because they're complete nonsense. And at the time, I didn't have the experience to know whether it was truth, really legit, or just a complete load of nonsense and BS, to be honest. It takes several years to be able to develop that ability to know. So when you're more experienced or more advanced, these forums and blogs can be great because you can pick the bits you need and pretty much throw away the rest. People sharing advice about levels for particular tracks, or saying that you can only EQ or compress by a certain number of dB, like 3 or 6 dB. When I was starting out in music production, this concept of never compressing more than 3 to 6 dB was just spoken like gospel all over the internet. And then you get into the more professional world and you realize that is absolute nonsense. You just do what the tracks need.
Oh yeah, the internet, aka the blind leading the blind. Man, there is so much good sounding, convincing BS on the internet. It can be extremely difficult to decipher the good stuff from the bad stuff. Or maybe even a professional engineer with tons of experience, let's just say, is on YouTube sharing some information. Then sometimes you'll have people who are just contrarian for the point of being contrarian, just trying to challenge them. And then the person who's trying to counter the information in the video really has no experience. We don't even know who these people are. They're just people on the internet typing up their own opinion, trying to outdo the more popular, let's say, content creator, especially if it's a person with tons of experience that we can see and we can verify and we like the actual music. So that's definitely something that happens a lot on the internet. One thing I like to do is I like to always point out to people who are trying to produce, engineer, or even if you're a recording artist, is try to meet up with a local engineer in your area. If you have one, local recording studio, just book some time to ask questions, or maybe even just have like one song you want to work on and your overall agenda is to kind of pick the person's brain. A lot of times engineers are working in isolation, or they really never necessarily have a place to open up and share their wisdom outside of maybe this content creation sphere or different types of music events, networking events. Like I've been to a couple, and producers and engineers, we like to open up and share all our, weird and funny gear quirks and things that we like to do. And a lot of times they don't really have anyone else in that type of quote unquote tribe that they can speak to. So don't be afraid, get on Google, maybe even ask a friend who's an artist, recording artist, producer. If they could recommend any type of studios, go there and then start to become familiar with certain engineers so they can give you their wisdom and you can get the information from the source, as opposed to nameless and faceless people on the internet who, again, can sound extremely convincing, but we really don't know who they are.
If there's anyone online trying to sell you any sort of formula or method to mix or produce a song or master by a particular method or formula or by numbers, that's absolute nonsense. Anyone that's professional knows that there's no such formula. It's a very creative process, and anyone trying to sell you, especially a course that gives you some exact step-by-step guide to a hit song or some perfect mix, that is nonsense, and I wish I'd known that sooner as well.
Yeah, the music business unfortunately is going to attract people, just like any other business, who are looking to exploit people's lack of knowledge for their own personal financial gain. Like you said, music is creative, it's subjective. Sometimes the wrong thing can feel right in this right context. So just going off of these different arbitrary numbers that this is the way to do things is incorrect. Music is all about feeling. We break rules all the time. We use things and we use tools in ways that they weren't originally designed for, just to give us certain tones or feel or sonics that we just like. It's a tool. We use it the way we want to. It's like painting a canvas. We can mix all types of different colors. It's not just scribble here for yellow and scribble here for blue. Then you put it together and you look at it and it's going to be a beautiful picture. No, it's not something that you can just rigidly tell people. It's all about feel. And once again, that's why I say it's important to kind of meet people in person if you can, if you're in an area that you can do so, that they can kind of explain their process so you can pick out the different types of tips and tricks and apply it to yourself from someone who you know is already reputable. I hope you enjoyed this video. I enjoyed reacting to this video. I hope I was able to share additional information just to give you more value on top of the information shared by InTheMix here. Make sure you check out the link in the description to the original video. Make sure you hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed my video. My name is Desmond A, and I'll be back with more great videos. Peace.